Wide desolate Hürtgen Forest landscape. How does one man, alone on a desolate mountain ridge, stand against an entire enemy battalion? How does he turn the high ground into a personal fortress, a stage for one of the most staggering displays of individual valor in the entire Second World War? This is not a myth. This is not an exaggeration. This is the story of a soldier who was ordered to hold his position, and who interpreted that order with a terrifying, absolute finality. For 72 hours, he would wage a private war. The outcome would be measured in a ratio so brutal it defies belief: 50 enemy soldiers for every one of his own. This is the story of the defense of Hill 1078. This is the story of Corporal Joseph Joe R. Beyrle. Medium shot of Corporal Joseph Beyrle. To understand the sheer scale of Corporal Beyrle's stand, we must first understand the battlefield. It is October 1944. The location is the Hürtgen Forest, a dark, sprawling tract of land along the German-Belgian border. American GIs have nicknamed it the Death Factory. The dense, ancient fir trees block out the sun, creating a perpetual, gloomy twilight. The terrain is a nightmare of steep, muddy ravines and thick, nearly impenetrable undergrowth. For the men of the 28th Infantry Division, the Keystone, the forest was a new kind of hell, a stark contrast to the triumphant march through France just months before. Close-up of M1919 Browning machine gun, their objective was to push through the forest and seize the strategic Rohr River dams. Failure to do so would allow the Germans to flood the entire Rohr Valley, stalling the Allied advance into Germany for months. The 28th Division was tasked with the main assault, a brutal, head-on fight into the heart of the German defensive network known as the West Wall, or Siegfried Line. Among them was Corporal Joseph Beyrle, a 22-year-old paratrooper from the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division. Beyrle was a veteran of the D-Day drops, but a severe case of trench foot had sidelined him. Eager to get back into the fight, he had volunteered as a forward observer, attached to a company from the 28th. He was a lean, quiet man, known for his competence with a weapon and a calm, unflappable demeanor. He carried not just his standard M1 Garand, but a powerful, tripod-mounted .30 caliber M1919 Browning machine gun. This weapon, capable of sustained fire, would become the instrument of his legend. The strategic situation was dire. The 28th Division was being chewed apart in the Hürtgen's meat grinder. Units were isolated, communication lines were cut, and the German 275th Infantry Division, though under strength, was fighting with the ferocity of men defending their homeland. They knew the terrain intimately and had fortified it with minefields, barbed wire, and interlocking fields of fire. The American advance had stalled. It was in this cauldron of chaos and despair that Corporal Beyrle received his orders: take his machine gun team and secure Hill 1078, a key piece of high ground overlooking the company's line of advance. Hold it at all costs. Low-angle shot of team climbing the ridge. On the morning of October 8, 1944, Beyrle and his 5-man team clawed their way up the slick, pine-needle-covered slopes of Hill 1078. The air was cold and damp, carrying the constant, distant thump of artillery. Reaching the summit, they found a scene of typical Hürtgen desolation: shattered tree stumps, shell craters filled with murky water, and a silence that felt heavy, expectant. Medium shot of team digging fighting positions. They immediately began digging in, carving out a primary fighting position for the Browning and several rifle pits in a small, semicircular perimeter. For the first few hours, the ridge was quiet. Too quiet. From their vantage point, they could see the smoldering ruins of a nearby village and the winding fire breaks that served as avenues of approach. Beyrle, a seasoned paratrooper, felt the tension. He knew this silence was the calm before the storm. Close-up of Beyrle signaling to hold fire, the storm broke at 1430 hours. The first sign was the whistle of mortar rounds, walking their way up the hill. Dirt and wood splinters exploded around the American position. Then came the distinctive sound of German MG-42 machine guns, their rate of fire so rapid it was likened to tearing canvas. Through the haze, figures in field gray uniforms began to advance, a probing attack by a platoon-sized element of perhaps 35 men. Beyrle held his fire, his hand raised, waiting. He let the enemy get within 150 yards. Dynamic combat shot of Browning firing, then, he dropped his hand. The Browning roared to life, its slower, deeper BRRRP a stark contrast to the German weapon's shriek. The .30 caliber rounds chewed through the undergrowth, cutting down the first wave. The attack faltered and broke. The Americans had held, for now, somber shot of American casualties, but they had suffered 2 casualties, 1 man dead, another wounded and in need of evacuation. Beyrle sent the wounded man and 1 other to carry him back to the company CP, reducing his defending force to just 3. The German response was swift and brutal. Their initial probe had confirmed the American position was held, but lightly. They would not make the same mistake twice. For the rest of the day and into the night, sporadic mortar and sniper fire harassed the men on the ridge, denying them sleep and keeping them pinned in their foxholes. The cold of the German autumn began to seep into their bones. Close-up of Beyrle's hands feeding ammo belt, dawn on October 9 brought a new kind of horror. At 0700 hours, a massive artillery and Nebelwerfer barrage slammed into Hill 1078. The multi-barreled rocket launchers, nicknamed "Screaming Memis" by the Americans, saturated the area with high explosive and white phosphorus. Wide shot of artillery barrage, the world dissolved into noise, flame, and choking smoke. When the barrage lifted, a full company of over 120 German grenadiers began their assault, using the cover of the smoke and the shattered terrain to close the distance. Beyrle's 2 companions were killed in the initial bombardment. He was now completely alone. Close-up of Beyrle dragging machine gun after barrage, coughing through the acrid smoke, his ears ringing, Beyrle dragged his machine gun from its shattered emplacement. He set it up in a fresh shell crater. He was surrounded by the bodies of his friends. Ammunition was running low. He was cut off. Little did he know, his private war was just beginning. Low-angle shot of Beyrle facing the German assault, as the first German soldiers emerged from the tree line, just 100 yards away, he squeezed the trigger. The Browning answered, its sound a declaration of defiance. Detailed shot of Beyrle changing the machine gun barrel, for Corporal Beyrle, the world shrank to the few hundred square yards of his shell-pocked hilltop. The concept of hours and minutes lost all meaning. Time was measured in belts of ammunition, in the changing of overheated barrels, in the brief lulls between attacks. He was a machine now, a single, relentless component of his weapon. Fire, reposition, reload. Fire, reposition, reload. The German commanders, frustrated by their inability to dislodge this single defender, intensified their efforts. They were convinced they were facing at least a reinforced platoon, perhaps even a full company. How else could one position put out such a volume of fire? They committed more men. A second company was fed into the meat grinder of Hill 1078. Beyrle fought with a chilling, predatory intelligence. He never fired from the same position twice. He would unleash a long, devastating burst from the Browning, then, as German mortar teams zeroed in on the muzzle flash, he would grab the 31-pound gun, its tripod, and the heavy ammunition cans, and crawl through the mud and craters to a new position. He used the tangled roots of fallen trees as natural parapets. He set up in drainage ditches and behind the husks of shattered pines. He targeted officers and NCOs first, breaking up the cohesion of the attacks. He used the Germans' own tactics against them, letting their assault lines get perilously close before opening fire, maximizing the carnage. The .30 caliber rounds were devastating at close range. The attacks would surge forward, only to break against. The second day bled into a second night. Beyrle was running on sheer adrenaline and willpower. He had not slept in over 40 hours. His canteen was long empty. He scavenged ammunition and rations from the bodies of his fallen comrades, a grim but necessary task. The cold was a constant enemy, sapping his strength. He was surrounded by the enemy, the sounds of their movements and conversations carrying through the fog that had settled in the ravines. He was completely, utterly alone in the heart of a German-controlled forest. Extreme close-up of Beyrle's eyes as enemy closes in, the crisis point came on the morning of the third day, October 10th. His ammunition was critically low. He was down to his last few belts. The Browning's barrel was worn, its accuracy diminishing. A new, coordinated German assault began, this time with direct support from a Panzerfaust team. A rocket screamed past his position, obliterating a tree stump just yards away. The German infantry, emboldened, pressed the attack with renewed vigor. They were now within 50 yards, close enough for Beyrle to see the details of their faces, their equipment. They knew he was alone. They knew he was almost out of ammunition. He was out of water, out of food, nearly out of bullets, and surrounded by a force that now numbered in the hundreds, all dedicated to his destruction. In that moment, crouched in a muddy hole, the situation was not just desperate, it was impossible. The weight of the past 60 hours, the loss of his friends, the physical exhaustion, it all threatened to crush him. Surrender might have seemed a logical option to some. To Joseph Beyrle, it was not even a consideration. Slow-motion shot of Beyrle's hip-fire charge, as the German infantry closed in for what they believed would be the final, easy kill. Beyrle made a series of rapid, calculated decisions. The machine gun was almost out of ammo, but he still had his personal weapon and a few grenades. The turning point would not be a miracle of reinforcement, but a masterpiece of individual audacity and sheer, unadulterated guts. He waited until the lead elements of the German assault were mere meters from his position. Then, in a move that defied all conventional infantry tactics, he stood up. Instead of firing his M1 Garand from the prone, he raised it to his hip and began walking toward the enemy, firing the semi-automatic rifle from the hip as he advanced. The 8-round ping of the N-block clip ejecting was followed instantly by the sound of a fresh clip being slammed home. He was a one-man bayonet charge without the bayonet. The psychological impact was instantaneous and profound. The German soldiers, expecting a final, desperate burst of machine gun fire or a surrendering, broken man, were met instead with a specter, a mud-caked, wild-eyed American advancing on them with cold, methodical fire. For a few critical seconds, their advance faltered. Confusion reigned. Was this a trap? Was this the spearhead of an American counterattack? Action shot of Beyrle with MP-40 and grenade. In that window of confusion, Beyrle reached his objective, a dead German NCO. He grabbed the man's MP-40 submachine gun and several spare magazines. Now armed with a fully automatic weapon, he turned the Germans' own firepower against them, spraying the stunned assault team. He threw his last 2 grenades into their midst, creating more noise and chaos. He then broke contact, melting back into the maze of shell craters and shattered trees, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. The German attack, thrown into disarray by this shocking, aggressive defense, broke and fell back down the hill. They left behind their dead and wounded, adding to the gruesome tally that now littered the slopes of Hill 1078. Wide haunting shot of battlefield littered with German dead, but Beyrle's fight wasn't over. He was now armed with an enemy weapon, but his own position was completely compromised. He spent the next few hours in a deadly game of cat and mouse, using the MP-40 to engage small enemy patrols that tried to flank him. He was a ghost on the hill, a phantom that struck without warning and then vanished into the German forest. Medium shot of relief force finding Beyrle. The true end came in the late afternoon of October 10th. A relief force from his company, having heard the intense fighting for days and fearing the worst, finally fought its way up to the summit. What they found would be seared into their memories for the rest of their lives. They found a single, exhausted, hollow-eyed man, surrounded by a staggering number of German dead. They found Corporal Joseph Beyrle, still at his post. Close-up of Distinguished Service Cross Medal. The cost of the 72-hour defense was, in its own terms, horrifyingly lopsided. Corporal Beyrle was the only American survivor from the original team on the hill. His 2 companions had been killed. But the price he had extracted from the enemy was almost unimaginable. A later battlefield assessment by intelligence officers, based on bodies counted and enemy radio intercepts, estimated that Beyrle had single-handedly killed or wounded over 100 German soldiers. Some estimates from his comrades and unit after-action reports placed the number even higher. The 50-to-1 ratio was not propaganda, it was a grim, arithmetic fact of war. His actions had crippled the local German battalion. The repeated, costly assaults on Hill 1078 had bled them white, disrupting their own defensive plans and buying precious time for the battered 28th Division to reorganize. Beyrle had held the ridge, just as he had been ordered. He had turned a tactical strongpoint into a strategic victory. For his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, Corporal Joseph Beyrle was recommended for the nation's highest award. He was decorated with the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest award for valor, his citation detailing his indomitable courage and professional skill against overwhelming enemy forces. The legacy of Joe Beyrle is one of near mythic proportions, yet it remains a verified, historical event. It stands as a testament to the impact a single, determined soldier can have on the battlefield. It is a story of what happens when training, courage, and an unbreakable will to complete the mission fuse into one indomitable human spirit. The defense of Hill 1078 became a legend within the 28th and 101st Divisions, a story whispered in muddy foxholes to give men hope, a stark reminder that even in the death factory, one man could make a difference. Poignant portrait of older Joseph Beyrle. The stand of Corporal Joseph Beyrle on a nameless ridge in the Hürtgen Forest was a feat of arms that defied all odds. But it was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Stories of extraordinary courage and sacrifice that have faded with time, waiting to be rediscovered. Subscribe to World War II Records, and join us as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.